got Shelby Lermo on the podcast. Shelby is a pre-social media internet friend from the days of Blogger, and we actually met in real life for the first time, kind of on accident recently. My band was playing a show in Chicago, and Shelby happened to be in one of the touring bands, and I didn't realize it, and he came up on stage after we played, and he's like, "Hey, are you Todd? I'm Shelby." And I was like, holy cow, this is cool. This is an exciting event for me. Very stoked on it. So Shelby is a prolific content creator. I had a blog called A Logical Contraption, which I was a fan of and honestly couldn't even really understand what was going on with it. Tons of music, conspiracy theories, turned into live shows and a podcast. We get into that a little bit. And Shelby is also a metal musician. He's in a band called Vastum, which is excellent. And his band that we played with is called Ulthar, which is also excellent. And he has some forthcoming projects that we talk about in this podcast. But Shelby is a very interesting fellow, has a lot of good opinions on music, conspiracy theories, and is just a delight to chat with. So check this one out. Enjoy. All right. So Shelby, we met on blogger.com.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Back in the days of a different era of internet content creation. And you had a blog called A Logical Contraption that was really strange. There's just a lot of different stuff happening all the time. And I honestly don't even really know what it was. What? Explain yourself.
I still don't know. It started out as just sort of like, I guess this was 2007, 2008. I was working a job that was really fucking slow, where I just sat in front of my computer and didn't really have anything to do for 8 hours a day. And so I started reading like music blogs, and like back when like Mediafire and Mega Upload was all the rage, and like stealing music and just like padding out your iTunes library with every fucking shitty like release that came out. I got really into that shit, and also reading wingnut conspiracy theory websites. And one day I was just like, I'm going to start my own one of these things. And it just sort of spun out of control for like a decade. If you consider all the different permutations of what Illogical Contraption turned into, we ended it about a decade after all of that started. And we sort of explored every fucking nook and cranny of weird shit that we could find. There was really no umbrella that it was all under besides the name. It was just whatever we were all into.
And any form of content could possibly be created as well.
Yeah, it was fucking slam metal, fucking, sci-fi, fantasy, dragons, conspiracy theory, aliens, CIA, just anything that caught our interest,
Yeah, I think that era of the internet was so interesting because it was pre-social media, right? But people still were just creating a bunch of stuff all the time. But the people who were actually motivated to create stuff on the internet were almost inherently interesting. And then there was also an element of all those people, not really trying necessarily to accumulate friends or whatever in the same way that you would currently, but just put out strange stuff.
Yeah, and I mean that was sort of the unexpected sort of benefit of doing that was I digitally met people like yourself, for example, and people all over the fucking planet and all over the country who I eventually met in person and actually became friends with. And you form these weird digital relationships back then when you had no idea who somebody was besides the words that they wrote. It was almost like a weird form of like tape trading in the 80s and 90s or something, where you only knew an idea of who somebody was, and then years later you actually meet them in person and you're like, oh yeah, you're actually a cool person. And it's no big surprise because you said pretty cool shit on the internet when we started talking, so it's not a surprise that you're a cool person. We're into the same shit or whatever. And yeah, a decade later, those are like lasting friendships. I met these people and we're all still homies,
Who's the weirdest person you met who you're still in contact with?
Oh, fuck. I don't know. That's a really weird question. Probably Al from the Ilcon podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that was technically because of the internet, but he's the biggest fucking weirdo that came from the Ilcon universe that I still hang out with. Even though he's a local guy, he's like, yeah, he's a fucking nutter.
Yeah, he well give us an Al story.
Jesus Christ. Okay. Maybe a year and a half ago, we were doing a live show. Okay, so we should do some more groundwork eventually, but
for people who aren't aware of
right,
iterations.
Right. Illogical Contraption, the website, eventually turned into a podcast, and eventually that podcast started doing live shows in the Bay Area. And so we were doing one of these live shows, and an old school reader of the blog and listener of the podcast, this guy Eamon from New Mexico, flew out from New Mexico for the live show and ended up spending the weekend with us. And he was so excited to meet Al. Just everyone who listened to the show and then came out and met us in person was always the most excited to meet Al, because he's exactly like he is on the show. And Eamon wanted to go out to, or we were all hanging out together. We went out to ramen at this place in downtown Oakland, and Al agreed to come out and meet up with us, even though he was hammered, which is kind of just like standard for Al. So Eamon was like meeting the legendary Al, and Al shows up in just like, it's this tiny little ramen shop with like 8 other people, and it's very sterile, like sort of like corporate lunch spot. And he's just fucking going off and like screaming terrible jokes and saying the most offensive shit I've ever heard. And people are turning around and like glaring at us. And this dude, like Eamon, is so fucking stoked and laughing his ass off the whole time, because this was the exact experience he wanted. And we came up with a nickname for Al doing stand up in this place. It was like, he became Ramen Williams that night. And just at the end of the night, he was like just pissing everyone off, and everyone's laughing so hard. He's just like holding court in this fucking sterile ramen shop. And at the end of the meal, we're all leaving, and the waitress comes over. She's like wiping down the table, and she's like, "Good night, you guys." And she looks Al right in the eyes, and she's like, "Make good decisions." And I don't know. That's just a classic Al moment, you know.
Well, I think that what you said is perfect, in that, you know, you have a fan who's like meeting someone who they're excited to see, and oftentimes that can be disappointing, right? Like,
yeah,
that person may be a dick, or they may be, you know, tired, or they may not be the person who you think they are, or they're not performing it, you know, their character that they do or whatever. And then it's like, oh, actually, this is just that person.
Al is, that's who he is 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I think that's why people loved him on the show so much, is like that genuine personality came through. He's just like, and also the thing about Al, like, for example, when I moved to Oakland about 7 or 8 years ago, you know, I asked several of my friends to help me move, which is always a shitty feeling to have to ask people to help you move. Al is like such a good friend that he volunteered. He came to me and he's like, "Hey, can I help you move?" He like volunteered to help me move. And then he showed up that day with like knee pads and gloves, like ready to fucking work. Yeah, he was like ready to work. Like, let's fucking do this. Like, that's the kind of friend he is. Like, that's rare to have the kind of person that volunteers to help you move. That sort of friendship is not to be underestimated.
So you mentioned the idea of tape trading, right? Mm-hmm. So for people who aren't familiar, before my time, you know, folks who are into underground metal would essentially tape demos and create little compilations for each other and write letters and send them back and forth, right? And you know, Shelby and I were saying, for myself, a lot of that was with other people on the internet who had these music blogs where you could, you know, click some rapidshare.de link and download some stupid demo that like no one should have ever even recorded, but you're like, oh yeah, this is very heavy. But what do you think about the just the direction of that type of communication over time? Like, where are we at with that now? I have no idea what people do currently to get that same experience.
I think that, I mean, for me, unfortunately, I use shit like Spotify to listen to music. I pay the $10 a month to have access to this vast library of music. But the thing is, like, a lot of the weird shit that you got even 10 years ago on Rapid Share or whatever, that's not on Spotify. So it sort of feels like the personal connection's gone, and like it's been sort of narrowed down what you have access to. I think that's what made it kind of more special back then, was you were finding like these rarities in people's collections that you could, like, those shitty demos that shouldn't have been released. That's what I miss the most. Like hearing that shit that maybe isn't on a label that is distributed by Spotify. And I don't know, I still have a circle of friends that we keep each other up to date on like new releases and stuff that might not necessarily be on Spotify or Bandcamp or whatever. So I still keep up in a way, just with, having circles of friends and having like, group chats, music group chats with people who are like-minded and sort of into the same shit. That's how I keep up. I don't know, for me at least, but most of the time I just use Spotify, which makes me feel like a fucking idiot, but it's so easy. I mean, it's hard to like live by any sort of ethics in 2019. It's like everything's so easy. You have access to whatever you want all the time. So it's hard to be, have any sort of like ethical exposure to that stuff.
I will say that YouTube actually has a lot of just about anything.
Yeah. That's usually my go-to. Like, one of my favorite death metal bands is this band from Germany called Pavor, and they're not on Spotify. They're not anywhere, but all their albums are on YouTube. So when I want to listen to that shit, that's where I go.
There we go. I've never heard of them. How do you spell it?
Pavor.
Awesome.
One of my favorite bands of all time, and they're can't find them anywhere besides YouTube.
Are they contemporary or are they older?
They put out albums in, I think, 94 and 2003, 2 full lengths, and that was it. A couple demos, I guess.
Nice. A perfect 9-year gap between records.
Yeah, they're a pretty weird band. Very like secretive and unknown, but such super fucking high quality music,
So you are also like a prolific musician yourself, right? In terms of being in too many bands and having a lot of different riffs. How do you think about the difference between consuming music, right? I mean, like we just talked about, there's an impulse to just take in content and kind of share it. But then there's another thing that may be separate for you or maybe similar to actually make your own stuff. Do you look at those as separate things, or are those similar for you?
That's a good question. For a lot of years, I sort of, like, after I stopped doing the blog and I sort of tried to stop listening to new music when I was writing a lot of music, because I didn't want to be influenced by whatever was coming out at the time, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing to do, but that was what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be influenced by whatever like was trendy or cool at the time. I wanted to do just what I heard in my head. And now I've been listening to a lot of new releases, for the last year or so. I have been keeping more up to date with like what's coming out, and but I still don't really feel like there's much of a connection for me between what I take in and what I put out. I think I've sort of like found my style and found my voice, and I'm gonna stay true to that when I'm writing and creating music. I don't think I'm necessarily going to be influenced by like outside, by what else is going on in the genre or whatever. If anything, when I hear shit that's popular and new, it drives me away from that. It makes me want to do something opposite of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's an element too of, I guess I don't know the best way to phrase it. Like, I think there's a valid concern of being subconsciously influenced by something that you hear.
Yeah.
Right. I think that people are like, oh, I don't want to accidentally steal a riff from a band that is like my contemporary.
Exactly. And I think that was the exact thought I had. I didn't want to be subconsciously like ripping off a riff or something. And I think that was sort of the realization I've come to in the last year or two, is I don't really need to worry about that, because I'm really consciously trying to do something different from all that shit. Especially with Ulthar, with my band Ulthar, we're trying to explore like really weird different ideas, still within like the metal genre, but like we want to do something different from what's fucking popular right now.
In what way?
I just feel like this is getting into a whole thing, but like the old school death metal genre right now is really stagnant. It's a really popular thing. There's a lot of bands out there that just sound like Incantation or that old school death doom sound that's really trendy on like fucking social media and shit. It's really reached a really annoying saturation point where there's all these bands doing the same sound, and the quality is really low, but the popularity is really high. And we're signed to 20 Buck Spin, which is a great label to work for. But 20 Buck Spin is putting out a lot of this OSDM stuff. And I've seen a lot of people compare our band and say Ulthar is like this old school death metal, death doom band, which is not what we're doing at all. You know, that's just not us. And it's frustrating to me to get categorized just because our label is associated with that sound. People associate our band with that sound, and we try not to be too influenced by what people say about us or, you know, reviews about our fucking record or whatever, but it just pushes us to get even more bizarre with what we're doing, to like distance ourselves from what's trendy and what's popular, because it's just at a saturation point where every band sounds the same and it's fucking boring, you know. I'd rather sell less albums and do something original than sell more albums and like sound like everyone else.
Well, I think with anything like that, once a thing becomes almost codified, where it's like, oh, this is old school death metal, this is what this sounds like, then it's very easy to, just have all those characteristics, right? And then, like you said, that almost plugs you into a convenient spot that people can then latch onto, right? So fans of old school death metal can be like, okay, this band has this guitar tone, this kind of riff, this sort of like moshy part, and their logo looks like this. I get it. I'm into it. Yeah.
I'll buy a t-shirt, whatever, but it's like, I don't want to do that shit. That's fucking boring to me, you know? Life's short.
And I think also to your point about sort of being lumped in with that inappropriately, right? I mean, most people don't actually have a really deep understanding of what's going on from like a musical perspective. So they latch on to like easy cues.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, okay, you're on this label, you've played with this band, you share members with that band. Cool. You're the same thing. Yeah,
exactly. And I think social media is a terrible place for all that too, because I think that, I deleted all my shit. I don't do social media anymore, but I think from what I've seen through like other people's windows into that world, like that just makes it so much easier when somebody can go to like the OSDM hashtag on Instagram and just like look at band logos and look at t-shirts and be like, oh, okay, I get it. That's also like, you know, it makes it too easy because everything's so rapid fire and fucking short attention span now that like you don't even have to necessarily listen to a band to think you know what they're all about. You can just look at their logo and their record label and be like, okay, I get it, moving on, you know. And I think it's just speeding everything up and making it all worse and watering everything down, you know, that everything's such, I don't know, just such short attention span. And, you know, social media just caters to that.
And I don't even think it's necessarily just the fact that it's short attention span. I think it's also like a signaling issue, right? So that people are more concerned with what the music they listen to says about them than they are about the music itself, which has always been the case. It's not anything new, but something like social media, like you said, sort of accelerates the ability to have trends or to latch onto a new thing or to post a certain number of records or t-shirts that you have to signal something about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So based upon what you're saying about trying to create something new-ish, something I thought about is the fact that, with a genre like death metal in the late 80s and early 90s, it wasn't totally codified yet. So there's a lot of different sounding bands that are all death metal.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that Ulthar is actually something like that, where it's like, this is very clearly death metal, but it doesn't necessarily have the exact trappings of like a clearly defined branch of the genre.
Yeah. And that's where my, that's my bread and butter. Like my favorite era of death metal is like 93, 94 after that initial wave of popularity had broke, and like the big popular bands and the smaller bands too were trying to figure out what the next direction to go with death metal was, and they started doing really weird shit. That's where my favorite, like Suffocation and Cryptopsy in like 1994. That's my favorite shit, when people started getting really weird with their songwriting and thinking outside the box, and like the genre kind of died off right then. But that's when I think it was at its best, when nobody knew what to do. Like the popularity had broken and it was kind of starting to disappear. And that's what sort of the mindset that I'm coming from. Like what's next? What's after the predictable death metal sound? Where can you go from there?
Do you like all the questionable funk metal records from that era?
I like some of the questionable funk metal records, to be honest with you. You know what I was listening to the other day that blew my fucking mind? I didn't know that Destruction had a funk metal phase. The German like thrash metal band. They put out funk metal.
I don't know that I knew that either.
Yeah, no, you should check it out. They put out albums in like, I think it was like 94 to 98. They put out an EP and 2 full lengths that were pure, like they had like they hired a singer, like a singer and a dude that played slap bass, and they were just like, they sounded like the Red Hot Chili Peppers for like 2.5 albums. And I had no idea until the other day. I was like looking up some shit on Metal Archives and read about Destruction's funk metal era, and I was like, no way. I went and listened to all the albums in their entirety, and I was like, all right, like this. Here's a little secret about me. I also love corny fucking mid-90s alternative rock. like that was when my first like musical awakening was the early to mid-90s. So shit like Primus, like Seas of Cheese, Pork Soda, and like that era of Melvins and stuff. I love that shit, and I will get down to some slap bass, man. I don't give a fuck.
And I think all those metal bands too, they were obviously into that.
Yeah.
And they're like, we're tired of this like boring headbanging stuff.
Totally.
Let's do something cool.
I'm down with all that shit. And if you listen to, fucking the first 2 Cryptopsy albums, there's fucking slap bass all over that shit. I actually, speaking of corny fucking Spotify stuff, just yesterday I just finished a second slap bass death metal playlist for my girlfriend, because she was asking me about slap bass and death metal, so I made her like 2 giant lengthy playlists of like death metal bands that have slap bass. So I've actually been submerged in that world quite a bit for the last couple days.
That seems like I guess if I think about it, right, that is a thing that happens, but 2 lengthy playlists seems aggressive.
Yeah, well, that's how into it I am. If you look into it, like all the sick fucking slap bass death metal bands are in Japan. I'll give you that hint in case you're interested, which you are not, and no one is. But that's what I've come to learn. Slap bass death metal, Japan is the hotbed.
That's I wonder what conversion of cultural forces has resulted in that happening.
That's a really good question. I have no idea why it all comes from Japan.
So you're in multiple bands.
Yeah.
And they don't all sound the same.
No. I wouldn't do it if
Which
they
is
did.
good,
Yeah.
which is helpful, right? How do you think about creating for those different bands? Does each of them have like a different primary songwriter? Do you sort of go into writing mode for a specific band? What's the story?
Yeah. So right now I'm writing for 3 different bands, which is kind of like a low point for me, but it's comfortable for me to be creating for 3 different projects. That's about the right level. Ulthar, like I said, is really just focused on being heavy and weird, and myself and our bass player Steve, speaking of slap bass, that guy can't believe slap bass, but me and him are sort of half and half. We write our own songs, and then we also edit each other's songs. It's very collaborative between me and him and our drummer Justin. That's how Ulthar works. It's basically just me and Steve writing riffs, and then all of us getting together and just tearing apart and putting them back together. I also play in Vastum, which we have a new album coming out at the end of October. And in that band, musically, I write half the songs, and the other guitarist Layla writes half the songs. So like the new album's 6 tracks, and I wrote 3 and she wrote 3, and that was the same on our last album. So I think that's basically how that band works. And that one's a little less collaborative. We come to practice with whole songs and teach them to everyone else. So that's how that works. And then I have a new project I'm working on with some guys down in San Jose, which is about an hour south of Oakland. And that's also very collaborative. Me and another guitarist writing material, and then it gets torn apart and put back together at practice. But that band's a lot more, like I was saying, 93, 94 Cryptopsy suffocation type stuff. A lot of very aggressive, over the top riffing and very fast, blasty shit. That I think we'll be recording our first album in like December, but that we haven't really gone public with that yet, but that's another thing that I'm working on. So everything's collaborative to a certain extent.
And are you just writing riffs all the time and then sort of allocating them to specific projects? Or are you I'm going to write.
I write
specific.
Yeah, I do. I write specifically for each project. There's each of the 3 bands I'm writing for has a distinct sound that's different from the other 2. So it's always very focused on like, it's always for a certain project. It's never just like, oh, I wrote a riff, I wonder who I should use it for. I don't have a lot of free time. So when I do have time to sit down with a guitar, it's like, I know what I'm working on and who I'm working on it for.
So you have like a vision in your head of the type of sound that you want to create, and then come up with riffs for that? Or are you just finagling riffs in your head all the time and then sort of sitting down and hashing out what they actually are?
It's a little bit of both. I definitely write in my head. You know, if I don't have a guitar in my hands and I'm, driving or at the gym or something, I'll be putting together songs in my head sometimes. I used to do it a lot more, I think, but that's something I definitely do. Even if I don't have a guitar in my hands, I'll still be putting shit together.
And then try to grab something and hum it real quick.
So yeah. The microphone on my phone. I've definitely done that, like humming riffs into my fucking notes and shit, which makes me feel like a real idiot. But sometimes that's your only choice if you think you have a good idea and there's not a guitar around.
Drew, who plays drums in Like Rats and Hate Force, and he writes most of the Hate Force stuff. Mm-hmm. He'll hum riffs into his phone, which like awesome, makes sense. But then, like you said, it's kind of embarrassing, right? Like like I feel a little weird doing it, and I definitely don't ever want anyone to hear it.
Yeah.
But at practice, he'll play the thing and be like, "Yeah, here's an idea."
Like plug it into the PA, and it's like do, 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 do.
Which is awesome, because I'd be like, dude, I would never let anyone hear.
Yeah, man, there's something to be something to be said for that level of confidence.
Yeah, you just gotta share the riffs however they are.
Yeah.
So with Ulthar, actually, I wanted to ask you just about I guess the overall vision for that band in terms of trying to create something new. Like, where do you think death metal can go? Is it something that needs to be progressed as far as song structure? Is it the harmonic structure of like chords and things like that? Is it all of the above? Where do you think there's room for the genre to develop into something new?
Well, this is something I've thought about a lot, and I think if we look at the historical model of metal, right, like the shit that's popular right now, like this old school death metal sound was like 1990, 91 is when it first had its first emergence, and the shit that was popular before that was fucking thrash, right? And if we look at modern day, that fucking 90, 91 OSDM sound is popular. And the last thing that had a big resurgence was like retro thrash, right? So it seems like we're sort of following the same pattern of extreme metal in the late 80s and early 90s. That shit is having the same shit's getting popular in the same order. So, I mean, my I don't know if I hope this happens, but it seems like the next thing that would get popular is sort of the more experimental technical death metal that, like I was saying, like 93, 94 Cryptopsy, Suffocation type stuff. Shit with some more ideas and some more technicality and some more flair. I hope that that's what gets popular next, but at the same time, I kind of don't, because that's what I like. And I think if it gets popular, it's going to get fucking watered down and lame. So I don't know. I'd sort of just expect that that's the path. That's the order shit's going to get popular in. Everything just repeats itself in music, So I think that's the next thing is and also, technical death metal got to a really stupid point in the late 90s and early 2000s where everything was Pro Tools'd out and, everything was like technical fucking slam that sounded like it was on a grid and made by a computer. And I hate that shit. So I hope it's not that gets popular next. I hope it seems like there's a couple bands like, are you familiar with Devourment?
Yeah.
They're from Texas. They were who Ulthar replaced on that tour where we played with your band.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But they just put out a new album that's, it's great. It's super fucking technical and grindy and blasty. And it sounds like a fucking band, It sounds like a band playing. It doesn't sound beat replaced. It doesn't sound like it's set to a grid. It doesn't sound Pro Toolsy. It sounds like super organic, but also super technical and super heavy. And I hope that more bands do shit like that. Like my favorite band in the world right now is Defeated Sanity from Germany. And they're probably the most fucking technical, crazy, like musically speaking, they're fucking insane. And they sound like, the reason I love that band so much is their production. Like they sound like a real band playing in a room together. They don't sound digital. And I don't know, in a perfect world, that's what I, the direction I would like to see metal going is like, high level musicianship, but still sounding like a real fucking band. I think that's sort of been lost with how much technology we have,
Yeah, I think that there's well, you're talking about like that kind of like mid 90s era when there's this, explosion of technical stuff. And then almost simultaneously, there's like a bifurcation into black metal where that was almost a reaction to
yeah, totally
death metal as well, where it's like, okay, we're going to make this atmospheric and arrhythmic and, melodic.
Yeah.
Which, that could be another sort of cyclical thing that happens as well. I wonder if there would be another bifurcation like that.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorite eras of music was like mid 90s black metal. And, Storm of the Light's Bane is probably my favorite black metal album when black metal musicians also got to that point where they were like, everything was sort of lo-fi and fucking dirty. And I think in the mid 90s, there were black metal artists too that were like, shit, let's take it up a notch. And the crazy part to think of is like Dissection. Those guys were still teenagers when they recorded that album.
Yeah.
And it's a fucking masterpiece. So I don't know. I try not to. I'm sorry. I've been speaking so much about death metal. Like I like all kinds of music. I just, you know, I play in the death metal genre, so I'm surrounded by it. But I love all kinds of music. I listen to mostly ambient music in my free time, really.
So there you go, an eclectic consumer of all things.
Yeah, I guess.
But I do wonder if there is a possibility for another, like genre to be defined at some point, right? Like, are we done with metal? Like, do we have, thrash, black, and death metal, and
Yeah.
okay, cool, that's it.
Yeah, I feel like that. I often ask myself that question as well. Just like, is there room for another genre? Like, what's left to be done? And I'm sure there's room for it. I just don't know where it is. Like, I've heard every like, I was listening to this band Bio Noise Generator yesterday that's like ultra hyper grind blasting death metal, but with like saxophone solos over the whole thing. And just really really weird shit. And it's like, I don't think that's gonna turn into a genre of its own, but it's like, it feels like at this point everything's been done, and anything that's different is sort of like its own novelty. Like, that's like Bio Noise Generator isn't, they aren't going to spawn a new genre of like saxophone metal. So it seems like everything outside of the established subgenres is just sort of a curiosity.
Well, and I think that to your point on that, a lot of that stuff, that sort of like almost postmodern recombination of genres, isn't necessarily creating a new form. It's just kind of like mashing up two things that you wouldn't expect to go together.
Yeah. It's like, there's like that trope of people pitching a movie to a boardroom full of, studio executives, like, oh, it's Rush Hour meets Tango and Cash or something. And it seems like it's the same thing with music. It's like, it's Bio Noise Generator. It's like, okay, it's Dillinger Escape Plan meets Naked City. And everything is just sort of a combination of these already established things. And yeah, the challenge with creating some sort of new genre is like, you can't just do that. It can't be like a combination of this and this. It needs to be its own new idea. And we've been working with the same ideas for so long. I don't know how to do that,
Yeah, it's like an adjacent possible rather than just like a recombination, right?
Yeah.
That you may use ideas that already exist and try to combine them together in some way, but it's not just, oh, here's this, slam it together, and like, oh, it's surprising because you wouldn't expect there to be a saxophone in a crazy metal band.
Right. It's just a novelty. I don't know where the big new idea is.
There has to be something with like the form of songwriting.
Yeah.
Right. That like the actual way that songs are structured, I think there could be something that takes the sort of like aesthetic sense of like a lot of metal bands, but that actually writes songs in a different way that isn't just like the same, okay, play this part 4 times, play this part 4 times, play this part 4 times.
And I feel like that's definitely a concept that Ulthar is aware of, and something that, is very, very consciously like talked about at our writing sessions and stuff. We're trying to write things, whether it's time signatures or song structures, we're trying to do things that are different and sort of like fucked up and other bands haven't explored. But, at the same time, we're still writing within sort of a death metal, black metal framework. But I think that that's one of our strengths as a band, is we're trying to move beyond all that and sort of like mess with timing and structure in a way that other bands don't really think about.
I think something could be done with like the way a lot of neoclassical composers wrote, right? Where there's like themes that are sort of built upon and waved in and out throughout songs. And that I think metal bands could do something like that. It's obviously different when you're playing with drums, since you have to have like a more structured rhythm, essentially, right? It's like, okay, this has to be this many beats or whatever, and you can't just kind of like be as squirrely with when things happen. But I think there's something there.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely like enjoy listening to like minimalist composers and stuff, and I think about stuff like that. And one of the few One of the few death metal bands I've heard actually sort of explore that is Dead Congregation from Greece.
Yeah.
They have a 2008 album called Graves of the Archangels, where they sort of like have themes that reoccur earlier and later in the album, and they weave them in and out of songs. And they, you know, they do interesting shit like counterpoint, which you don't hear a lot of bands doing stuff like that. I think that definitely has a place in death metal, and not enough people really think about it. Because it's been said many times, but like classical music and death metal actually have a lot in common as far as composition.
I think there's a lot that can be learned from, like you said, you know, counterpoint and the romantic era and all that kind of stuff. It's like you can take concepts from each of those styles of composition and then attempt to integrate them into you know, a more aggressive, like modern metal band.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, stuff like Brian May's guitar playing in Queen, that sort of like Baroque guitar style. That's something I haven't figured out how to incorporate into I guess it's sort of black metal has had its moments, but I would love to figure out a way to work that sort of feel into a death metal framework. I'm just not smart enough. I'm not an astrophysicist, so I don't know how to do that.
So you mentioned that you don't have a ton of time to write stuff, but from an outside perspective, that seems to not be the case at all. Since you, as you mentioned, are in 3 bands, you know, Logical Contraption was just churning stuff out for a decade. How are you so prolific despite claims to, you know, not have enough time to do a bunch of stuff?
Well, like I said at the beginning, the reason I had so much time to put into a Logical Contraption at the beginning was I had a fucking slow ass job where I spent all day hiding from my boss and fucking writing articles about aliens and shit, you know. So that's why the website at least was so fucking prolific, is because I had a lot of free time, and also we had a staff of like 10 or 12 people writing also, so there was always people contributing shit. As far as now with the music that I'm writing, the reason I don't have a lot of free time is because I am creating music for 3 bands, and when I do have free time, that's what I'm doing. And I travel a lot, you know, I tour a lot. I would like to be better at writing when I'm on tour, but it's, you know, it's really difficult. When you're playing a show every night, it's really annoying to try and pull out a guitar and write when you're in the van or something. But yeah, I have a lot going on in my life outside of music too. You know, I have a lot of interests. I spend time with my family. I spend time with my girlfriend. I have a shitload of stuff going on. I do fucking podcasts on Sundays sometimes.
That's right.
With you,
for example.
But yeah, it's I do have a lot going on, but also at the same time, it's like this Vastum album that's coming out in October. I wrote 3 songs for that, and the last album came out 4 years ago. So I had 4 years to write 3 songs. That wasn't that much work.
Although I think that a lot of people, you know, they want to create stuff, but I don't know if they filter themselves or, you know, it's just like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this. Like what, actually I'll ask it in the way that Tyler Cowen asks it. He's a economist and podcaster, and he often asks people like, what is your production function, right? Like, what does it actually look like for you to be like, okay, this is happening? You know, are you judging yourself? Are you filtering? Are you just throwing stuff out there and creating drafts and allowing the group to edit it? What's the deal?
Yeah, for me, it's a lot. The last thing is creating something and then bringing it to the group, and remove a big part of it is removing ego from the picture and writing a song, putting it in front of a couple other people and being like, what do you think of this? And if they're like, this is garbage and we don't like it, you have to be able to say, all right, you're right. Like, let me try again or whatever. And the other part of that is making a draft, creating something and putting it in front of other people and letting them tear it apart and put it back together a way that they like better. That you've got to be able to do that. I mean, there are plenty of artists that don't do that. that write a song and it's like, this is the song, learn this song, this is how we're doing it. But I don't like doing it that way. I think that you can definitely improve on shit by letting like-minded people look at it and add their own flavor to it, you know? And for me, like with having such a busy schedule, another big component in creating is scheduling time for myself. Being like, this is something I have to do to stay productive, is be like, okay, this Saturday, I'm going to give myself 3 hours to sit down with a guitar and write and record and work on something. It doesn't work for me to be like, oh, you know, I'll pick up a guitar and write a song right now. I don't have that kind of time in my life where I can just relax and sit with pick up a guitar and start writing. I need to actually schedule time for myself to be productive, or else I won't. So that's
you're also not just like waiting for inspiration to strike. You're saying, okay, I'm going to force myself to come up with something.
Yeah, I'm not fucking inspired by anything. I think the fucking world is awful, and the only inspiration I have is like anger and frustration, which is also useful, you know? Like that's a lot of what I write is a response to those feelings of like isolation and alienation and fucking anger and frustration with the planet, you know, with not the planet, but the people on it. But yeah, I try to compartmentalize things and have access to that anger and that frustration at all times to use it when I need it. When I can sit down and be like, okay, I'm writing lyrics, like what am I feeling? But it's like playing live shows is a great venue to release that sort of aggression and anger. So you got to learn how to do it so that you're not just a fucking dick all the time, which some people might tell you that I am, and I wouldn't argue with them, but that's definitely been, for 20 years, that's been like my release, is getting on stage and screaming my fucking guts out. And I think I'm a pretty mellow person most of the time, and that's probably a big part of the reason for that, is because I get on stage and fucking make an ass of myself and scream at the top of my lungs so often. You know?
Yeah, I think that the idea of actually saying, okay, like I'm going to schedule time and I have this ability to kind of like call on my experiences, right? That I can, like you said, compartmentalize it and then use it when I've decided it's time to. Mm-hmm. Then also to separate the idea of like editing from creating, mm-hmm. right? Those are probably two things that enable you to actually like create so much stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're scheduling it, you are able to tap into the pieces that you want to utilize, and then you don't filter it too hard when you're creating it.
Right.
You know, you allow the filtering to happen separately. That's awesome.
Right. And it's hugely important to have people that you trust, that you collaborate with. Like, you know, Steve from Ulthar, like he's one of the most amazing fucking artists I've ever met, much less musicians. Like that guy just has a crazy brain for music and for numbers and for ideas. And like, I trust that dude. So when I have a song or I have an idea, I can take it to him and we can pick it apart together. And I do the same thing with his stuff. We both trust each other, and we can edit each other's shit and trust each other to do it without fucking it up. And that's really, really cool and really important, you know?
So we talked a little bit about conspiracy theories. I'm skeptical of conspiracy theories in general. Mm-hmm. Convince me otherwise.
I'm glad you asked this question. I've been asked this question before, and I have a very, very concrete answer for you. And that is, I am not going to try to convince you otherwise. Ever since I started doing Illogical Contraption and writing about conspiracy theories, the viewpoint I took from day one was, this is all bullshit. Like, you shouldn't believe it, and we kept that up through the podcast. We would bring this up from time to time, but like, you shouldn't believe any conspiracy theories. The interesting shit for us was looking at what people believe and how fucking crazy it is that these ideas are out in the world and that people actually believe these ideas. But once you drink the Kool-Aid and start believing them yourself, you're in fucking trouble. So I don't want anyone to believe conspiracy theories. I think everybody should study them and be aware of them. and there's sometimes truth in them. Like this whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. It's fucking mind-blowingly crazy. And there's definitely some really fucking heavy shit going on involving like high level government and fucking, celebrity shit. But once you decide what's true, you're fucked. So you should never decide what's true. You should be informed and you should be aware, but you shouldn't believe anything. Our motto was believe everything and believe nothing when we were writing and podcasting about conspiracy theories.
What theories do you think are overrated?
Overrated conspiracy theories. I mean, if you look at it, our fucking, our government runs on conspiracy theories right now. I feel like everything that the fucking White House is trying to sell to us as, every bullshit right-wing conspiracy theory is just, it's awful, like that took all the fun out of writing about conspiracy theories when the government adopted all of them, and like that became the governing force in our country was fucking conspiracy theories. So that's the shit that's no fun anymore. I think the only shit that's really fun to think about anymore is like the deep, like reptilian fucking Alpha Draconis, like shape-shifting alien shit that's really insane and really out there, But yeah, I mean, the most overrated conspiracy theories are the ones that have been adopted by the fucking government that are being used to misinform people on fucking Fox News now, That's the shit that I hate, and that's the shit that took the fun out of writing about conspiracy theories in the first place.
Yeah, I think that the sort of mainstreamization of conspiracy is really, really fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. That it's something that now that was like on the dark corners of the internet 10 years ago is now sort of like the mainstream political dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you think that happened?
Oh man, I really feel first and foremost, and this is something I feel really strongly about. I think social media is like hugely responsible for the mindset that let these fucking crazy bullshit ideas become mainstream thought. Because I think that a lot of people like me and you, people like our friends, people in our social circles, but everyone thinks that that like clicking like on someone's Facebook post is somehow a substitute for activism, or like equal to activism, and it just sort of creates this mindset, or lack of a mindset, where people are just so busy looking down at their phones that whatever terrifying shit is happening in the world is sort of outside, and your only reality is like this little screen right in front of you. And as long as you like and subscribe to the right things and the right people, like the whole world could fucking burn down all around you, and you're not even going to notice because you're so caught up in this fucking digital world. And I think that's what let this fucking extremism take over, is because people are so caught up in their fucking Twitter feed and their Facebook groups and shit that the real world is sort of like a secondary thing now. Like meeting people face to face and talking to people, on the street takes a backseat to fucking liking people's posts and shit like that doesn't on the grander scale, like doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter if your fucking post about the rainforest being on fire gets 10,000 likes. Like that affects nothing. And people are in this mindset where they think that's what matters. It fucking absolutely doesn't.
Yeah, I wonder if the if the population like has always either harbored conspiracy theories and they just weren't as crystallized since they didn't necessarily have the information available, or if people are just potentially vulnerable to it and then being exposed to it sort of like push them down that road, or if there's, you know, some other reason for it, even that like, you know, people thought all this stuff but didn't realize anyone else thought it, and now they see that it's being shared in different contexts, so they feel comfortable sharing it.
Well, I mean, it definitely doesn't help that there's like, you know, and this isn't a conspiracy theory, like it's confirmed that there are disinformation agents from all over the world spreading crazy, you know, I hate to say fake news, but you know, there's disinformation agencies spreading fake shit on fucking social media and people believe it. You know, I've had to stop my parents from like, when I used to be on Facebook or whatever, I'd see my mom or my dad posting some fake news story, and it didn't matter if it was like Democrat or Republican or whatever. I'd just be like, hey, please research this. Please click this link before you fucking share this with the world. It's not true, you know? But yeah, I think
my dad just shared the like Facebook is going to use your photos against you. Like I hereby declare.
Yeah. No, I didn't see that firsthand, but like some friends told me about it, and I'm like, this is so stupid. This happens like once a year, or it used to when I was on social media. It used to happen once a year, where people would do the I hereby declare, like you can't use my photos. It's like, you fucking idiot. You think if Facebook wants your photos, they can't just fucking take them without you knowing? Like, do you trust them that much after seeing Zuckerberg in front of fucking Congress and shit? Do you really trust them that much that they're not like, all you have to say is I hereby declare, you know, like, come on.
Well, I do think that one of the things that's really interesting about a lot of that stuff as well is that the conspiracy theories that people believe are often ridiculous, but the actual truth is probably stranger and potentially scarier than people realize, right? Like if we use the example of, you know, people are like, oh, you know, I said to my friend the other day something about a shirt and then it showed up in my ads, like Facebook's listening to me.
Yeah.
It's like, Facebook isn't listening to you, but they have way more data on you than you realize.
Oh, yeah.
And like all your credit card transactions are being funneled into a data file that is attached to your account, and they can see what you've bought in the past, and they can see, you know, where you've traveled to, and combine those pieces together to realize that, hey, you're a pretty good candidate to buy this shirt. And you just happen to talk about it at the same time that the ad showed up, which is like weirder than you realize, but it's not just the obvious, like, oh yeah, they're listening in.
Yeah. Speaking to that same point, I feel like, you know, I have friends who are, I feel like there's this mindset as far as conspiracy theory goes. I have a couple friends that are like full on like QAnon believers. And there's kind of a mindset that goes along with that. That's like Donald Trump is this like 4-dimensional chess genius, and everything that he's doing is like somehow fooling you into thinking he's an idiot, but like actually he's a genius and everything's going to be okay. And I feel like it's the same thing of people. It's like kind of like a form of cowardice, because it's too scary to see the reality of what we're in. Like we're, you know, an entire fucking nation of fucking millions and millions of people, and the ship's being steered by a fucking buffoon, you know, through a sea of like nuclear missiles and fucking famine and climate change and shit. But people pick these conspiracy theories. They're like, oh, actually, he's a fucking genius and he's going to be our savior and everything's going to be okay. It's like you're too scared to see the reality of what we're actually facing right now. So these conspiracy theories are sort of there to like pad it out and make people feel like we aren't actually doomed. Like there is hope, and he's looking out for us. He's going to be our savior and all this shit. And you know what I mean? It's like the reality is scarier than the conspiracy, and therefore, yeah, that's what people believe in. It's like, you know, we're going to be fine. It's all just a game that they're making up for us.
I've read some stuff about like very implausible beliefs being a like excellent signaling mechanism for like in-group loyalty, right? It's like the more ridiculous the claim you're making is, and the more that potentially upsets like an outgroup, right? Particularly in like a political arena or folks who are, you know, involved in some of these deep conspiracy theories. It's like the more absurd your claim, the more you're demonstrating in-group loyalty, which then can create like a ratcheting effect where people are, you know, outdoing each other to signal that they are in fact in this group. But then that ends up having real life consequences down the line as well.
Sure. And like what percentage of like, you know, like alt-right loyalty is based around, or was originally based around like sort of this Reddit mindset of like, oh, let's fucking trigger the libs. You know, it was nothing. The mindset was nothing more than like, let's make people angry by pretending that we believe this. That turned into like an actual belief system. And that's where, you know, the Richard Spencer fucking Pepe the Frog alt-right thing came from, was like, let's just fucking piss people off on the internet because it's fun. Now that's like a huge political movement, you know? And I think that's exactly what you're sort of talking to, this like in-group loyalty of like, oh, what sort of fucking bullshit thing will you say to piss people off and like inspire people's allegiance to you as a group member because you're willing to take that chance and be that stupid in public, you know?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, we talked about this a little bit, but it is so strange to see, again, like 10 years ago, the stuff on the internet just, like you said, trigger the libs. And then that sort of like the other side of the coin, that very extreme, aggressive, like political correctness and language policing, again, have now become, you know, very, very common and prevalent well outside of just like weirdos posting on LiveJournal or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not, you know, I don't feel like I subscribe to either end of the political spectrum, because I feel like the other end of that spectrum is just as ridiculous, of like, you know, neoliberalism and fucking language policing. And I that's also just fucking fascism, to try and tell people what they can or can't say and what they can or can't do. So it's just a matter of like all the extremes, and either side of the spectrum is so fucked and like up its own ass, you know, via the internet and fucking social media and shit. Like, it's so crazy on both sides. That was just my way, you know, deleting my Facebook and my Instagram and shit was sort of just a way to try and stay sane. And honestly, it's like, it worked. It was, I feel like a much more sane person now, not tuning into those frequencies and hearing that crazy fucking voice in my head every day, you know?
Yeah, there's an element of, you know, just controlling your own attention and your own thoughts, right? And that, yeah, deleting those things is a great way to take a step in that direction. I know I do a bunch of weird stuff with like different software and plugins to prevent myself from repeatedly checking my email or looking at Facebook and all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to be more aware now. Like I'm still a fucking, I mean, it's hard not to be a fucking phone junkie in this day and age. Like, I'm trying to just be aware of having time every day where I put my phone away and just don't pay attention to my phone, and just be away, you know, just be away from that thing for a couple hours a day. Because it's just like, you know, we used to live in a world where we didn't even have cell phones. Like, if you were sitting in a doctor's office for 2 hours, like you had to read a magazine. That was
Better Homes and Gardens.
Yeah, you had to do that. Like when we were fucking teenagers, that was your option. Like you had to be present. You had to interact with the fucking physical world around you. That was your only way of killing time. And you know, I was on the fucking BART train the other night coming back from San Francisco, and just marveling at like looking around me, and every single fucking person is like scrolling through their Instagram feed or their Facebook feed or their Twitter feed, like every single fucking person around me. And it's a scary turn for humanity, you know? It makes me wonder where we're going. I feel like this has been said before, but like that movie WALL-E, that Disney movie WALL-E, where everyone's just a fucking fat ass cow with a screen in front of their face with like a toilet attached to their ass and food being pumped into their mouth. Like, that's where we're headed. And like, I don't want to take part in that, you know?
Although I do think that there's a small percentage of the population that can use, devices and the internet, et cetera, to like just be constantly bettering themselves and like consuming interesting information
Sure.
and reading articles and listening to podcasts and, having like interesting conversations with people. So there's like a small percentage for whom it's like this excellent resource,
Sure.
but then for a lot of people, it ends up being just like junk food.
Yeah. I feel like what you're saying, that's a great point, and I try to use it that way. I try to listen to informational podcasts. I try to like learn and better myself, and I'm not trying to pretend like I'm some fucking like, like I'm better than anybody else. I'm just as bad as anyone else, but like I try to at least be aware of what I'm using technology for, and that I'm not using it as just junk food. And it's not that, it's not just a bag of Doritos for me that I'm just shoveling shit into my mouth. I'm trying to actually learn things and fucking use technology for good, which I'm not 100% of the time, of course, like it's impossible, but I try to at least be aware of that.
So with your extensive output on a logical contraption, what were your like favorite interviews that you did?
Oh man. So yeah, we ended the show in December of last year. Like I said, which we had a great run. We did the show for like 7 years, and in that time, we did fucking probably a couple hundred interviews. And it's hard to pick which ones. I'll say definitely. Are you aware of the underground horror director Bill Zebub?
Maybe.
He's from the Midwest. He's from, I want to say Cleveland or something, but he makes these fucking disgusting, like, misogynist movies about, like, he's like sort of a fake edgy guy where he's like, I make movies about fucking rape and like just because it's shocking. And like I always thought he was a fucking dirtbag, but we ended up having him on the show, and I ended up telling him he was a dirtbag, and he was like, we ended up like hanging up on him and telling him to fuck off. And like that was probably one of my favorite interviews, because like when we started the interview, I was like, fuck, I'm gonna have to play along and like interview this guy and ask him about his ideas when I really think he's just a fucking dirtbag. But that was one of my favorite interviews, because I just straight up told him, like, dude, you're a fucking dirtbag. And we hung up on him. And that always stuck out to me as like one of my favorite moments, because we got a lot of response too of people like, thank you for fucking saying that to that guy, because he sucks. But one of the like as far as good interviews go, Dave Attell was one of the best interviews we ever did. He was so fucking nice. It's awesome when like you interview a famous person and they end up being like a total sweetheart. Like we interviewed Dave Attell, and he was rad and super nice. And we went to a commercial break, and he called us back to thank us during the commercial break. Like he was that level of like nice guy, It's always rad when somebody, you're not expecting somebody to be super fucking rad, and then they like take that extra step to thank you and be cool. Dave Brockie from Guar was also like, that was a great interview, because we did that one in person, like backstage at the Regency in San Francisco, me and Corey. And that was a great experience, because when we first walked into the room to interview him, you can tell he was very standoffish and like was used to doing these interviews where people wanted him to be in character. They wanted him to be odorous Urungus. And we could just tell we were like, he's sick of doing that. And so we asked him, like, do you want to do this interview as Dave Brockie? And he said yes. And it was sort of like, he immediately sort of softened, and we had a really great interview with him, and he was super nice. And that sticks out as one of my favorite interviews, because he actually talked to us as like a fucking human being and didn't have to be in character. And, he died like a year or two after that. And it was just a very special thing to be able to have that time with him before he passed away,
Yeah.
So those are a couple that stick out for me, I guess. Oh, and Alex Trip.
What about Longmont?
That was going to be my next one. Longmont Potion Castle, the moment that he prank called Alex Trebek on our show, and it ended up like on one of his albums. That was another high point for me. Because yeah, there's a new Longmont Potion Castle documentary that just came out. It's called In Search of the Lavender, or Where the Hell is the Lavender House?
Yeah, but it's only screening, right? You can't stream it anymore.
Yeah, the dude who made the movie. Well, the guy who made the movie, Vivek Venkatesh. He's a friend of mine from Montreal. I actually got interviewed in the movie. It's pretty embarrassing, but I'm in the movie at one point. But they're having problems with distribution and shit. It's been screening. It's screened in New York and out here in the Bay Area. They've been going city to city, but they're having problems with distribution because there's a lot of like copyright problems with it, and the production is sort of fraught. Like I don't know. I won't really go into it, but it's like they're having big problems with the distribution. There's a lot of people who aren't happy with how it was made, and like Rainn Wilson from The Office was listed as a producer, and I think he didn't necessarily want to be listed as a producer, but they sort of made a joke out of it in the movie. So they've been screening it, but I'm not sure if it'll ever even get digital release. We'll see.
Yeah, it sounds complicated, but I do hope to see it someday.
Yeah. I can send you a link. I can't send your listeners a link, but I can send you a link.
Yeah. I would be so stoked on that.
I'll do that right after we get.
I have it bookmarked as priority movies.
All right. I think I have a media link that'll still work that I could send your way.
Unbelievable. Well, cool, man. So we talked about some of your bands. I'm stoked on a new Vastum record. What should people check out if they want to check out your bands?
I feel like if you know the names of my bands, you can fucking Google search whatever you need. Vastum, Vastum. We have an album coming out at the end of October. We're playing Killtown Death Fest in Copenhagen, September 8th. If you live in Copenhagen, I guess. Ulthar, Ulthar. We're touring West Coast out to Denver in November. We'll be putting out an album next year and doing another U.S. tour next year. My new band, I'm not going to talk about yet because I'm not ready to, but we'll be recording soon too. Yeah. Also, I play in a band called Apprentice Destroyer. I just play live with that band, but we have an album coming out September 20th. Yeah, that's about it. You have Google. If you're interested, you can go find this shit.
Hell yeah. And you can access the Illogical Contraption archives as well.
Yeah, Illogical Contraption.
The podcast is on iTunes. There's hundreds of episodes.
Yeah, or illogicalcontraption.com has all of the shows. We had three different shows under the Illogical Contraption banner. So you can go to illogicalcontraption.com and have access to, like, I don't know, it's like fucking 500 back episodes that we did of all of our different shows and shit, including our live shows and whatever else. It's all out there.
Thanks for listening all the way through. I admire your grit, your persistence, and your perseverance. Since you made it, I have a few favors to ask of you. Go ahead and open up the show notes on whatever podcast player you use. In there, you'll find links to all the resources that were mentioned throughout the show. There's also some links there in which you can leave a review or subscribe to the show. And podcasters are always harping on this because this actually makes a difference in terms of the algorithms that recommend podcasts to new people. So if you do that, it helps more people find the show. And if you head over to toddneef.com, you can sign up to receive most of my thoughts and writing, which really only go out to the email list. A lot of it never makes it to the blog or the podcast. So if you like what I have to say and you want to see some of my recommendations and stuff that I've been checking out, go ahead and subscribe to that email newsletter as well.